Hey folks, a little bit of a different style of video today, but hopefully this is interesting. One of the things I've always been interested in my 20 years playing World of Warcraft is the WoW world map and how the whole different zones all fit together and what's behind the big mountains that you can't seem to get past when you're in the game and what's the deal with some of these inaccessible or unfinished areas of WoW. And most of the answers to that stuff are in the actual game files and specifically the real world map files that make up the overworld maps and ultimately link together to become a portion of the WoW minimap. So I thought it might be interesting to show the real game map and some of the more interesting areas of that map and sort of how it all fits together. And I've been using two tools for this. First of all, the amazing program WoW Export that I might go into another time. And then this is the older online WoW Tools map resource. So at the end, I might explain a bit more about these resources and maybe even dive into future videos where we look at the layout of dungeons and other models in WoW Export. But for now, let's dive into the actual world behind the World of Warcraft. And first of all, I'm a classic player, so I'm going to be using the classic era or the SOD version of the game, but you could, of course, look at other versions if you wanted to. Let's look at the Stormwind area first as an example before checking out the rest of the two continents. So I think most of the people know that the world map we get in-game this is like an artist's rendition, right, of the world. It doesn't reflect the reality of how the game actually fits together. And when we look at Stormwind, we have Stormwind marked here in the larger Elwynn Forest area. And if we zoom in, we can see that it's here on sort of the northwest side. On the continental map, we have Burning Steppes over here to the northeast, and then we have Syrian Gorge, and then above that is Dunmoreau with Ironforge up here. And then in between the two is sort of this like unnamed, unclickable zone. So what the heck is there? And by the way, we know that when we're in Stormwind and we look at the north side, we have the dwarf zone there, and then we have the big towers of Stormwind Keep, but we can never see anything beyond that. So when we dive in and look at the actual game files map, zoom in on Elwynn Forest here, we can see Stormwind here and see that to the north of Stormwind is sort of that unclickable, unfinished zone that I talk about that's between what would be Dunmoreau, and you got Ironforge right here, and the area going over to Nomergon here, and this big empty space. And of course, Burning Steppes and Syrian Gorge with its top-down view, so you can't tell, but the big, tall Black Rock Mountain right in here. But when we look at Stormwind, it seems like the Stormwind model is just placed over this big, flat, uniform, light brown area with these big steps and more flat green and then the flat white that leads into the snow of Dunmoreau. So is that really what's there? Well, yes, it is. You can actually glitch yourself down below Stormwind and see that. So when you're under Stormwind, sort of looking at the entryway from what would be the middle of the city, you can see the entry there. And if we look toward what would be the keep, you can see the towers of the keep. And sure enough, we are just on sort of this big, flat, light brown area between the mountains that bordered the area in the zone. And if you ride further north, get under sort of that area of the keep, and you can see it was all just sort of a facade, unfinished towers meant to be seen in the distance when you're running around within the Stormwind model. And if we continue on, you can see that, is it really that these actual big notches are here, these big steps? And sure enough, yes, they are. There they are. And if you ride yourself way north, you eventually reach the white textured area that would be the south of Dunmoreau. And sure enough, these big sort of steps in the map where they change the textures, and you can see they line up with what you saw in the map here. So sort of interesting stuff, how it all kind of fits together here. Let's look at the rest of the continent. We'll sort of start in the north and work our way down. So right here on the northwest side, we have Tirisfal, and you can see you would have Undercity down here and the starting area of Brill over here. Scarlet Monastery would be up here. When we move further west through the sort of road here, you get to Western Plaguelands and the Nightmare area of Anderhall, and you'd fly into Chillwind Camp down here, and you've got the different farm areas where you do the Cauldron quests you can see there. Further east, here is Solomance down here, the little island. Further east, of course, is EPL and the long ride across to get to Lights Hope Chapel. That would just be this little building over here. And then in the north, we have Strathome, which would be just in the real world, it's a small portion of the model placed over another big unfinished flat area that before the displacement teleportation was patched out of the game, we could teleport ourselves in there and actually see some of that and see Strathome from underneath. So more of that big unfinished zones that you can or could explore. Further south of that, we have hinterlands, and you've got sort of the troll area down here in hinterlands, and this would be Airy Peak over here. Through the, or south of that, you've got Arathi Highlands and a Refuge Point right in the middle. You've got, sorry, I'm sort of more Alliance facing here. I play Alliance, as you can probably tell, but the Horde area would be over here. You've got the big Stromgard sort of fortress down here. Through the big wall, we get over to Hillsbrad, and you've got Durnhold and Torin Mill would be this little area right here. South Shore, of course. We've got the Alterac Mountains with all the elite ogres in this area. And then we have the still domed or shielded Dalaran right here. And then further to the west, we have Silverpine. You've got SFK dungeon over here. And another interesting thing, so in the in-game drawn map, you have this big south-facing peninsula that is inaccessible, of course. But in the real game files, it's just this small area that's to the south of the wall that you can't get through, that's an unfinished area that would later, of course, evolve into the Worgen starting area a couple of expansions in. Moving back over to the east, south of Arathi, you have this Thandol Span Bridge, and one of them's broken on this side, and then you get into the wetlands and Menethil Harbor over here. Further south, we already looked at Dunmoreau and Ironforge. You can see Ironforge, you'd exit right here and go down the road. And of course, when you fly out, they finished all this area between Menethil and Ironforge, and they even put in a little sightseeing, the unfinished dwarf airport, or not unfinished, but inaccessible dwarf airport. You actually can get there if you wall hop or jump through the mountains, but they knew you'd be flying over here, so it's finished. This area here, this border would look just like this if you were in the game, similar to the big jagged borders of textures that we saw underneath Stormwind. So very interesting stuff. Here is Loch Modan over here. You can see the dam there. Further south is Badlands. The entrance, the main entrance to Uldaman would be here. Back entrance is over here somewhere. To the west of that is Searing Gorge. And like I had pointed out earlier, the northern entrance to Blackrock Mountain would sort of be over here. Burning Steps is down further south, and you've got the southern entrance to Blackrock Mountain, which would be here. You'd go and do the Dragonkin Menace quests over here. And then to the further east of that, we have another massive, like unfinished, unused area that was just left completely untextured and is a big empty area just to build out the side of the continent. So I already showed Elwyn Forest, pretty interesting. To the east of that, we have Redridge. South of that, you have Swamp of Sorrows and Sunken Temple, where we're all going in SOD often right now. South of that is the Blasted Lands, and this would be Nethergard here, and the Dark Portal down here. To the west, we have Deadwind Pass, and Karazhan Tower has been there all along. It's unused, of course, till we get to TBC, but it is there. Further west, we have Duskwood, and Darkshire City is over here. This little area right here is where Stitches would spawn. He's actually yellow. If you see him spawn, you think he spawns on top of you, he's going to kill you, but he'll run right by you, and then he gets to the road and he turns red, and he wrecks any low levels that are on their way there. Further west, you have Westfall, and you can see Sentinel Hill would be right here. Down south, we have Moonbrook, and the Dead Mines entrance would be there. And further south of that, if you run around here, and we have to jump around and swim, and you get to ZG Island that's been in use recently. And then STV. And another very interesting thing, you can see in STV, the entire Zul'Gurub instance is built into the real world here. And it's sort of sandwiched between these unfinished borders between Duskwood and STV. And you can actually visit this pretty easily by accessing it through the south area of Duskwood. And when you get in, you can see that the real world version is laid out roughly the same way, but far less finished than the actual instance that we played sort of late in Classic. So very interesting stuff. The rest of STV, there's the arena down here, and you've got Booty Bay facing this direction, and even some of the islands, and you can see the pirate ships further down here. So some very interesting stuff in the Eastern Kingdoms. Let's look at Kalimdor. All right, same deal. So sort of going top to bottom here, but starting off, I'll look at probably one of the most interesting things on Kalimdor. If you zoom out, you can see this blue area over here, and this area way to the northwest would be GM Island. And it was there at least as of, we're looking at version 1.12 right here. I think that in the current Season of Discovery version, you either hit a wall when you try to get out here, or this is not in the game files at all, but it was there as of then. Don't visit, you're not allowed to go there. Onto the main continent, of course, the northernmost point is Teldrassil, big tree. And you have right here sort of the Night Elf starting zone, the larger questing zone. Darnassus, of course, would be over here. And when you go through the pink portal, which would be this little spot right here, you end up at the base of the tree in Ruttheran Village. Over here on the main continent, you have sort of the long, skinny area of Darkshore. Along here, Aberdeen would be here with its 3 piers getting to all different places. To the east of that is Fellwood, this area right in here and down to here. The Alliance flight path would be here, and you've got the area where you would farm furbolgs for rep up in here. And down further south, these little buildings are where there are satyrs, and you could farm fellcloth and do all of that stuff. Back up here, because I missed it, is Moonglade, the sort of druid area right in there. Of course, the big white area of the map is Winterspring, obviously. Over here would be Everlook. If you want to farm that special tiger mount, I think it was, you'd farm endlessly up in here in this north area, I believe. Way south, you have this gray area is Dark Whisper Gorge with all of the elite demons. We're down here. West of that is Mount Hyjal, another area that, like ZG and AQ that I'll show in a second, it was built into the map and later turned into an instance. You used to be able to access this and explore it. Now you cannot. If you try to get in there, at least in Season of Discovery, you're instantly teleported out. But when you used to be able to get in here and explore the uninstanced version, it was kind of a neat place to go. There was areas that had like under construction signs, and over here somewhere, I think it's this little spot right here, was an entrance that's just like the entrance to Onyxia's lair. It's a big like dragon cave that you enter, but there was 1 or 2 of those in the Mount Hyjal area also. So very interesting stuff. On the east is Ashara, this big zone, of course, lots of Naga areas. The island way off here to the south, I think down here is where you do your Hydraxian Waterlords stuff. So that's pretty interesting. Big wide zone over here is in green is Ashenvale, of course. So up here on the left would be the BFD entrance, and then down here would be Astronar. And let's see, way over here on the east side, if you want to level 40 to 50 in SOD, you can do it in about 5 hours right here with incursions. Just totally broken. Interesting area. So south of Ashara, here's Orgrimmar, and it's on the north side of Durotar. And it's another situation where its model is placed on top of an unfinished big sort of flat area, kind of like I showed with Stormwind and Stratholme. So pretty interesting stuff. The rest of Durotar is down here. I think the Orc starting zone is the south area of that. West of that, of course, is the Barrens. And down here you'd have Crossroads, and this is where Wailing Caverns would be up here. And this is such a huge zone. Way down south in this, you'd have, where is it? Yeah, here, these 2 sort of thorn-covered areas would be where you'd have RFK and RFD. Let's see, what else? Yeah, going back to the north, you'd have this orange area is actually Stone Talon Mountains. It looks different in sort of the real world than it does in the map, but this would be a lot of running through this one. You'd have to run all the way along here up to get the Alliance flight path at least, and then you have to go back all the way down through this area, through the Harpies, if you want to get into Desolace, which is this area here, and you could run to Nigel's Point up here, and this is the island where that stupid book will never drop, and down south in Desolace are some demons in this area, and there's sort of, it's hard to see, but like a little road that goes around in a U shape. That's where all the skeletons are, and you got to kill 20 skeletons. So that's very interesting. East of that, it's a nice looking zone, Mulgore, and of course Thunder Bluff is here. We talked about the Barrens already, just a giant zone, but way further east of that is Dustwallow and Theramore and Mages. This right here, this little island would be where we would do Murlocs from maybe, I don't know, 37 to 42 or whatever it is. Back to the west is a really interesting zone, of course, Feralas. And starting the westernmost, you've got the island here. This is Feather Moon. And then south of that is the Isle of Dread, where you've got all the chimeras. And this is like the Nava Cave, where Rested will tell you to level, if you're melee especially, but any one level on just grinding Nagas for quite a while. The rest of Feralas is an interesting zone also. And of course, you have Dire Maul here. And another interesting thing, of course, so when you get to Dire Maul, you do run through the ogres, you run past this central area that's there, but you're like zoning in like here, here, and here, and you don't actually ever get to the rest of these areas. So kind of an interesting way that that's all laid out. East of that is Thousand Needles, and I mentioned when I first messed around with the Mage Displacement Teleport, I ended up in this big dead zone between Thousand Needles and Feralas and Shimmering Flats over here, and Tenaris to the south. And I was actually able to see, kind of all of these borders here. I was able to see Shimmering Flats from above over here, and then the uninstanced version of Zul'Farrak. So, yet another situation where a dungeon is partially built into the world, which is very interesting. ZF there. And of course, that's in Tenaris. And here in Tenaris, you have Gadgetstan here. Down further south would be the Caverns of Time down in this little area. And then, of course, the pirate area is over here on the eastmost area. West of Tenaris, there's the rest of Tenaris there. West of that would be Ungoro Crater. And Marshall's Refuge would be at the very top up here. And then the area with all the fire guys in the center here. And then you've got your little pathway up here to last, but certainly not least, because it's probably one of the most interesting zones, Silithus. So Silithus, of course, big zone with lots of bug areas in it. And right in the middle here, can't really see it very much, but this would be Cenarian Hold. And you can see, if you look at the normal map, that Silithus is, like, even when you highlight, it's only like the top half of this, and then this area is something that you can't even see and click, and that's because, of course, when you get south of Silithus, you have the completely uninstanced area of AQ, which is very interesting and was yet another area that they built a huge area. It was a very early version, and it didn't end up structured or looking even like the instanced area of AQ, but this was in the game from very, very early on, and another area that you could actually explore if you use some sort of creative transportation to get in there. So very interesting stuff. That's Kalimdor. A bit more about this tool itself. So this is wow.tools online. It's an online resource, and it's actually now at like the web address is old.wow.tools, and it's got like a somewhat limited model viewer, but it's partially interesting. There's better ways to view models in WoW, but this is interesting. It's got an outstanding online map tool that you're looking at, and you can, of course, as I showed, you can bounce around between continents and look at the different maps. There's a bunch more larger or different maps that you can view and look at. There's even unused maps that you can see and kind of explore for areas that didn't make it into the game. So very interesting thing to look at all of these different maps that you can look at. But one of my favorite things or features of this is, if you're familiar with like Google Maps, real world maps, and especially the Google Earth maps, you have the ability in Google Earth to do like a historical function and look at different, satellite version maps from from the past. And you can do that here in WoW too, which is a very interesting thing I think to do. So I've been showing you the not 1.1, the 1.12 map, the retail map, because that's the closest one to WoW Classic as I understand it. But, you know, I remember from the early days of playing WoW when Dire Maul just wasn't in the game. And we showed Dire Maul and it was here. And so like doing that sort of like wayback function, if you go down from 1.12 to some of these beta versions, zero point 0.9, that area is just flat. It just wasn't even there. It was added later. So it's interesting to go through and look at the historical changes and differences that they did. And, last thing, sort of going back to Eastern Kingdoms, I started off looking at Stormwind, right? And specifically this area between Stormwind and to the north. And there's so many unfinished areas of the map just like that. And we have Cata Classic coming out very soon, and I'm not a real fan of Cata Classic. I think the game was super fun, but I just hated the fact that it erased the original game and the original map. And I think Cata was probably the number one reason why we needed Classic in the first place. So Classic Cata doesn't make sense to me, but I do have to appreciate the fact that, if you go back in time to as Wrath is wrapping up, which would have been, call it 3.3 retail, switch to that, you can see, so now Stormwind has evolved, right? It's now got the harbor here, and they've added some of the texture in that unfinished area, because this is areas you might be able to see from these little flights around the harbor, but there's still this big unfinished zone, and there's unfinished areas all over this map. It's very messy all over, and Wrath is wrapping up, and the map looks like this, and the lead devs say, okay, team, we're adding flying. Make it so that all these areas that are unfinished are now finished so we can fly over them, and they look good. And it just was like a monumental job, I'm sure. And they did it because by the time they got to 4.1, the PTR, instead of that big messy area north of Stormwind, it was a nice, neat, finished area that you could fly over with some water in between. And they did, frankly, the rest of the map that had all these unfinished areas. So it must have just been a monumental job. And it's quite an impressive thing when you look at the maps like this. So anyway, I think that was quite an accomplishment, and you can still see that progress and quite a bit of other interesting stuff when you look at the map like this and change the different times or versions of the game that you're looking at. So anyway, I hope that was cool and interesting. Thanks a lot for watching. Take care, folks.